Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 376. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the afternoon of Monday, September the 23rd, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Haven't done one of these for a long time, and the title of today's podcast, you may be scratching your head thinking, what's he thinking? And the title is, it's in this the fill in the blank you never knew series that I was doing for a while. And what I would do is I'd take old rockers or old the guys everybody knew, the guys and gals that everybody knew, and just do a kind of a documentary on them. Hey, these are things about this guy that you didn't know. Yeah, you knew he was a singer. You knew she did this or that, but you didn't know that she did this, or you didn't know that he did that. Today's podcast is the Frank Sinatra Jr. You never knew. Not senior, not the old man, not the one that everybody knows, but Frank Sinatra Jr., his son. And there's a reason I'm doing this, and I'll get into that as I prep you and preface the nuts and bolts, the meat, so to speak, of the podcast. And we'll get to that momentarily. First off, before we get into the podcast, the Frank Sinatra Jr. You never knew, I read an article this week, in fact, it was today, in the Wall Street Journal, and it had to do with the electrical grid. And we've been hearing all along, we've got, I don't know if they call it global warming anymore. I think they call it climate change now, which is accurate. Sure, as we speak now, the world is certainly getting warmer, and the climate is certainly changing. Now, that's always been the case. And as things get warmer, we get more uncomfortable, and we need more energy to keep us cooler. In theory, you would think, well, but maybe in the wintertime, we don't need as much energy to keep us warmer. And I think a whole lot of it has to do with the fact that we like to live in places that are convenient. Southern California, for instance, 18 million people, and there's 13, 18, 15, something like that. And there's not enough water to support a third of that. But the weather's beautiful, okay? But it does get hot in the summertime, and you got to have electricity to keep you cool, because we in the West are used to that, okay? That's just the way it is. And we've done a great job of, and when I say we, the world, but in particular, people in the U.S. have done an outstanding job at cleaning up our act as far as generating electricity goes. We pulled out of the Paris Accords, okay, and everybody lost their mind over that. But the truth of the matter is, no country has done more to clean up their air and to get greener than the United States. Nobody has come close, okay? A lot of that has to do with just the scale of who we are, and we're the largest economy in the world. We were the biggest polluter in the world, so we had a long way to go, and we certainly have come that way. How have we gotten that way? Well, many ways. Of course, solar, not so much nuclear, but that's coming back. They just opened up a new plant in Georgia, and the news says that we're going to recommission the 3 Mile Island plant. And when it doesn't melt down, nuclear is very clean, okay? But and wind power, sure, all that kind of stuff, hydroelectric, all that stuff. But the biggest reason we've gotten so much cleaner is because we've gone to natural gas. Natural gas is, sure, it does omit some pollutants, but hardly any. And it's just a rounding error compared to coal, okay? So slowly but surely, we're closing down the dirty coal plants, but replacing them with natural gas. So things have gotten so much cleaner. Now, solar is wonderful. Solar is outstanding. Solar is totally clean. And in places like Southern California, in fact, anywhere in the West, except for the Pacific Northwest, where the sun shines a whole lot, it's wonderful. Not so much here, okay, in the Midwest. We just don't get a ton of sunlight. We get a lot of, in the summertime. Sure, we get lots of sun in the summertime. We get lots of clouds and rain in the summertime too in the Midwest. We just don't get enough light to make it worthwhile. In fact, I personally investigated through my utility company. I said, hey, what about solar? Do you guys offer anything where you give me super good interest rates on if I want to put solar panels on my roof? And basically they said, yeah, this part of the country, you're wasting your time. Even if we gave you 0% interest, the cost, you would never recoup the cost here in East Central Missouri. It just doesn't work out that way. You just can't get there from here with solar. Or they do it in California. How come they can't do it here? In California, they do it with geothermal. They do it with wind. They do it with solar. They do it with a lot of things, okay? Here's the thing. I was talking to my buddy, California Dave, this weekend, and he shot me a picture of his electric bill. And basically, in fact, I don't want to misrepresent anything. I'm just going to go ahead and look at it. I'm going to give you the facts, okay? His electric bill is tiered 3 ways, okay? There's a first tier, second tier, and third tier. Similar to mine. Mine is first tier, second tier. Has to do with how much you use. It's so much until you use a certain value, and then it goes up or down, whatever. The 2 tiers, he paid almost 37 cents a kilowatt hour, almost 55 cents a kilowatt hour. And at the third tier, the highest tier, he was paying over 74 cents a kilowatt hour. What do I pay? Well, I have 2 tiers, okay, on mine. And my 2 tiers were 9.9 cents a kilowatt hour and 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Under 10. In some cases, almost 8 times cheaper. I was paying almost 8 times less per kilowatt hour than my buddy in California in the LA metro area. Now, he will tell me that he lives in LA County, but not LA, the city of. If he were in the city of LA County, it may be up to twice as much of that. Okay. Bottom line is he uses half the electricity that I use and pays more than twice as much. That, my friends, is the cost of green energy. Okay. The state of Washington recently had a deal with the businesses were forced to pay, or were being forced to pay, so much money to the state to buy carbon credits. Okay. And there's legislation in the Pacific Northwest saying, look, we want to do away with this because it really hurts businesses up here, and the businesses are moving out. And the state is losing their mind, said, well, if we don't start charging you for carbon credits, we're going to lose $3.8 billion in revenue. And I think to myself, if a company has to buy carbon credits and that money goes to the state and the state says we're going to lose a bunch of revenue, how does that clean up the air? It's a tax the state gets just to spend more money, okay? Now, I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to go wild. I'm not saying we just need to burn more coal and so we can't see out of the window because it's so nasty. We need to do everything we can within reason to clean things up. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean get rid of coal? Yeah, eventually I think it should. Coal's dirty. It's nasty. There's other alternatives like natural gas, okay? In the meantime, do you want to pay 74 cents a kilowatt hour like they do in California? Or would you rather pay 8 cents a kilowatt hour like we do here in East Central Missouri? In this part of the country, electricity is generated primarily by coal, natural gas, hydroelectric, and nuclear. Primarily, that's where we get our energy. Hardly any solar. There's some, but solar doesn't make sense. Again, if you make it all green tomorrow, you're going to pay 74 cents a kilowatt hour, okay? Let's say 34 cents because that's the low end, okay? 34 cents is still almost 4 times what I pay. That's unbelievable. So consider this. Take your utility bill, take your electric bill and times it by 4. That's what you'd pay if we go to green tomorrow. It just doesn't make sense. Friends, I know food has gone up. I know cars have gone up. I know everything has gone up, okay? But here's the thing. You can make changes to your food, okay? You're not going to eat steaks anymore. You're going to eat more chicken. And we could probably stand to eat a little bit less too, if you know what I mean. And I use the collective we because I include myself. Maybe you don't go out to eat as much, okay? Maybe you cut out the snacks, which isn't a bad thing. You can always do things. Maybe you shop at Walmart and Aldi instead of one of the high-end stores, okay? You can always do something. You got to turn the lights on. If it was in the 90s last week, you got to have air conditioning, okay? That's just how we are. So there's not a ton you can do with saving money on your electric bill. The reason I say this, the reason I even mention this is the fact that we need to green up. We need to do what we can for the economy. I get it, but we don't need to do it tomorrow. So you think to yourself, well, why don't we just go ahead and just convert from this to that? Well, the thing is we're using more electricity all the time. And you think to yourself, well, how could that be strong? I mean, we've gone from incandescent lights to the LED lights, which saves a ton of electricity, and it does. We've gone from the furnaces and coolers, air conditioners that aren't very efficient to the very efficient ones. Doesn't that save energy? It certainly does. But here's the thing. There's two things that we're ramping up for that are just going to cause our electricity requirements to go higher and higher and higher. In fact, if you look at the curve as to how quickly we're adding green energy to the grid, it's not keeping up. And those two things are, of course, electric cars. About 1 in 4 cars that are sold now are electric cars. Okay, so even though they're not ramping up at the rate that we thought they would, or that some had hoped that they would, every year the percentage of electric cars on the road increases, okay? And the percentage of ICE cars decreases. That's just a reality, okay? Maybe it's not going to increase at the rate that they thought it would, but it's still increasing. The other thing is, what's the biggest buzzword you hear every place? It's AI, artificial intelligence. The computer does the thinking for you. And I've used AI and with mixed results. Sometimes I think, wow, that's fantastic. Sometimes I've used it and I think, if I'd given this to my 6-year-old grandson, he'd have done a better job. But like any new technology, it's getting there. But AI is very energy dependent. In other words, it takes a lot of juice to have AI think and do its thing. Microsoft primarily were the ones responsible for reopening 3 Mile Island because they needed the electricity. They said, look, we're going to pay, I think, $1 billion to get that thing back up and running. Maybe more than that. It was at least $1 billion. Maybe it was $2 billion. I don't know. But they're going to pay that to get it up and running because they need the extra grid power to run their AI. They're going to redo a whole nuclear power plant, take it out of mothball just because they have to do it, okay, to get the electricity for the AI. Now, why do I even mention this? I've learned, if you look at a problem, over the years I've learned, if you look at a problem, there's always multiple solutions to fix the problem. It's always that way. You can just let it go and let it take care of itself. And quite often that works. But sometimes it takes a generation or two for that to happen. You can take a sledgehammer or a 2x4 and beat it into submission. Sometimes that works. But the casualties quite often, the medicine's worse than the disease. It's one of those types of deals. I've always found that usually, not always, usually, the solution is somewhere in between. You don't just let it go and let nature take its course. And you don't just beat it into submission with a sledgehammer. But you think about it, talk to everyone involved, and think, look, how can really everybody get a little bit of what they want, but nobody gets everything that they want? It's that small word that begins with a C, known as compromise. And I think if we use compromise, if we compromise on this whole green energy thing, everyone can get what they want. We can continue to ramp down on our carbon footprint. In other words, make the air easier to breathe. Don't throw so many pollutants into the air. I mean, because the pollutants aren't good for anybody. They're bad for you. I don't know how many people die every year of cancer because of pollution, okay? And if the people are dying, it's not doing any good for the wildlife either, or the trees, or the bees who pollinate our food, any of that, okay? There's no good thing to pollution. But if we compromise, if clear heads prevail, we can maybe find a quick way or find a good way to make nuclear a bit safer, okay? Ramp up the natural gas because we've got tons of it. And it's pretty doggone clean. In the places where it's viable, sure. Go ahead and put in more solar cells. In the places where it's viable, sure. Go ahead and put in wind or geothermal or hydroelectric or whatever, okay? Do all of that. So the solution is all of the above so that everybody gets what they want. We don't go 100% green tomorrow, but then we don't pay 75 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. And maybe, just maybe, if we keep the electricity bill down for folks, they can spend more money on other stuff, just not turning the air conditioner on or the furnace on or running their electric car, okay? If clear heads prevail, we can get from here to there in a successful way. What do you think? Send me an email. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear what you think about this transition from the carbon-generated electricity to the green-generated electricity. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me. Or comment on Facebook or however you like. Whatever easiest for you, okay? Okay, let's get to the topic of today's podcast. The Frank Sinatra Jr. You never knew. I think so. Why would you do a thing on Frank Sinatra Jr.? Who was Frank Sinatra Jr.? Well, he was Frank Sinatra's son, okay? And once upon a time, I always thought that he was Frank Sinatra with a junior behind him. Why was he halfway popular? Because Frank Sinatra was his dad. If you ever listen to him sing, he sounds a whole lot like his dad. He kind of looked like his dad because he was his son, okay? And I never really had a whole lot of respect for him. And let me tell you when that changed. When I work on the old Jaguar, okay, in the shop, quite often years ago, the family got me a smart speaker. And so I'll put my iPhone onto some station and I'll listen to different types of music. Sometimes I'll listen to a local radio station. Sometimes I'll listen to a podcast. But often I'll go to iHeartRadio. And iHeartRadio has different genres of music. So whatever you're in the mood for, I'll play it. And I'll listen to bossa nova. I'll listen to old 70s rock. I'll listen to you name it. I've listened to it. Okay. But one of my favorite stations to listen to is the Frank Sinatra station. I think to yourself, okay, so they play nothing but Frank Sinatra songs. No, that's not true. If you want to get only Frank Sinatra songs, you got to pay money. Okay. And I'm not going to pay money. I'm just going to get the free stuff. So probably about 1 in 5 songs are actually songs by Frank Sinatra. The pros and cons of that is, if you want to listen to just Frank Sinatra stuff, that's not going to happen. That's the con. But the pro is you get to listen to a lot of other music. You get to listen to Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Tony Bennett, Perry Como, Bing Crosby, Michael Bublé. They even have Elvis Presley thrown in there. And, among others, Rosemary Clooney, a lot of Rosemary Clooney stuff, okay? And Frank Sinatra Jr. as well. A lot of Frank Sinatra Jr. stuff. In fact, some of his songs are hard to differentiate between the old man, okay? Now, he's since passed away just like the old man at a much younger age. But he was born in 1944. He died in 2016, which makes him 72, if my math is right. And he sang American jazz, big band. He was a songwriter. He was a conductor. He did a little bit of everything. He was the son of singer Frank Sinatra and Frank's first wife, Nancy Sinatra, younger sister of Nancy, and television producer Tina. Okay, so there were three of them, Nancy, Tina, and Frank Jr. Born in 1944 in Jersey City. And he was technically not a junior because Frank's name was Frank, the old man Frank, his middle name was Albert, and Francis's name was Wayne, but they still called him Junior just because. And what did he want to do? Well, of course, he didn't see his old man very often. Junior didn't see Senior very often because he was always on the road working. Plus later on, when him and his mom divorced and Frank got married to several others, he just didn't see him. So Junior hardly ever saw Frank Sinatra Sr. Because he was always working, but he always wanted to be a pianist and a songwriter and a singer ever since he was born. Okay. And as a young man, he started doing this. And then in 1963, when Frank Sinatra Jr. was 19 years old, he was kidnapped. Actually kidnapped from Harrah's Lake Tahoe Resort, room 417, and he was held for ransom. He was released 2 days later after his dad paid the $240,000 ransom demanded by the kidnappers. Sinatra had offered him $1 million at first, but the kidnapper says, "Nah, we don't want that much. We only want $240,000. In fact, I've read a book about this, and Frank Sinatra Jr. basically said, yeah, the kidnappers were nice to him. They treated him nice. He didn't have a bad time with them. He never felt threatened. He kind of almost thought this was a big joke. They were never mean to him. They never threatened to kill him. They kept apologizing. The kidnappers were almost like buddies to him, okay? In fact, the main kidnapper, Barry Keenan, he said he just considered this a loan. He intended to pay Frank Sinatra Sr. back, okay? In fact, Barry Keenan, Johnny Irwin, and Joe Amsler were the three kidnappers. Shortly after Frank Jr. was released and the ransom was paid, they caught him. They were tried, convicted, and sentenced to very, very, very long prison terms, of which they only served small portions. Now, the mastermind, Keenan, was later judged to have been legally insane at the time of the crime, and so he wasn't legally responsible for his actions, so they kind of let him go. And since the other guys were just going along with the deal, they kind of let them go too. It didn't help that Frank Jr. said, yeah, they were nice to me. They never threatened me. I thought it was a joke. I kind of went along with it. In fact, there were even rumors that Frank Jr. was in on the deal. Now, that wasn't the case, but it was a rumor, mainly because he was never harmed. He was never hurt. He didn't speak poorly of his kidnapper. So the inference was, hey, maybe he was in on this as well. One of the goofy things about this whole thing is the kidnappers demanded that all communications be conducted by payphone. So during these conversations, Frank Sr. was always concerned he wouldn't have enough coins, so he'd run out of coins. So that prompted him to carry 10 dimes with him at all times, and he did that for the rest of his life. In fact, Frank Sr. was buried with 10 dimes in his pocket just because he was so afraid that somebody would kidnap another member of his family. He wouldn't have enough dimes to go ahead and call up and do the thing. Remember the movie Robin and the Seven Hoods? Frank Sr. and the Rat Pack were filming that movie during the kidnapping. In fact, the stress of the kidnapping, in addition to the assassination of Sinatra's close friend John F. Kennedy a few weeks prior to the kidnapping, caused Sinatra to seriously consider shutting down production, but they didn't. Think about it. Your son was kidnapped, and a man who you supported and were personal friends with, John F. Kennedy, oh, by the way, was the president of the United States, was assassinated, and you didn't throw in the towel. You kept on going because that's what Frank Sr. did. After the kidnapping was done, Frank Jr. he performed at different local clubs. In fact, at 19, he was the vocalist for the Sam Donahue Band. He also spent considerable time with Duke Ellington. Why with Duke Ellington? Because Frank Jr. wanted to learn the music business, and he thought, I'll work with the Duke, and I'll learn it real well. He did, and he did. Now, Sinatra Jr. spent most of his early career on the road. In fact, by 1968, he had performed in 47 states and 30 countries, okay? By 1968, okay? That's only 5 years after his kidnapping, okay? So he was only 24 years old doing all this. He had already done all that, okay? He appeared on a lot of television shows, Smothers Brothers, Dean Martin, Las Vegas acts, etc. So he was like his dad in the fact that he always worked, okay? Now, during that time, Frank Jr. gained a reputation for rigorous rehearsals and demanding high standards from all of his musicians, just like his old man did. He cut his teeth in acting. He appeared with Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sr.'s buddy, in a drama called A Man Called Adam. He was also in a couple episodes of Adam 12, Clinic on 18th Street. Just a few little acting, almost cameos, okay? No leading roles like his dad did, but just little cameo roles, kind of like, okay, here's Frank Sinatra Sr., or Jr. rather. And that's when I always thought he was just kind of the dopey kid who was just following on his old man's coattails. Here's where things changed. In fact, Junior just toured, and he was like his old man in the fact that he really didn't have a lot of unique songs. Frank Sinatra and lots of those singers during that genre, they had their own songs, but they weren't songs that they wrote. And they took songs, their albums and their performances were taken from what they call the Great American Songbook, okay? And they were songs that were tried and true classics. Everybody sang them, but everybody arranged them just a little bit differently. I've talked about this before. A perfect example is Fly Me to the Moon, which in my opinion might be the best song ever recorded. Now, Fly Me to the Moon was no big deal, okay? In fact, first person to record Fly Me to the Moon was Kay Ballard. That name may sound familiar to you. If you remember a television show in the 60s called The Mothers-in-Law with Eve Arden, Kay Ballard, and I can't remember the two men who were in it. But Kay Ballard was the dark-headed one who was kind of goofy, okay? But before she was an actress, she was a singer. And her first hit song was Fly Me to the Moon. Fly Me to the Moon was a very slow, methodical ballad. But when Frank Sinatra recorded it, he recorded it with a Quincy Jones arrangement and with the Count Basie Orchestra. They jazzed it up, they perked it up, they brought it to the next level and turned it to the song that everybody's familiar with, okay? So they took a tried and true American classic from the Great American Songbook, jazzed it up, and turned it into something that was just outstanding, okay? That's what Frank Sinatra Jr. did as well. He performed songs from the Great American Songbook, just like his dad. Now, things were tough for Frank Jr., and the reasons being is, sure, he got the door open because he was Frank Sr.'s boy. But a lot of people held a lot of animosity against Frank Jr. Believe it or not, one of those who held the most animosity against Frank Jr. was Frank Sr. Because Frank Jr. kind of did the same thing Frank Sr. did. And he was good. And the old man thought, look, this guy's taken my business. In fact, he's even stolen my name. And his buddies kept saying, what do you mean he didn't steal your name? He took the name that you gave him, Frank. You named him this. How can you be angry at him for taking your name? Well, there were big time problems between Senior and Junior because of that. But that's what Frank Jr. did. He toured the country, toured the world, made an album or two here or there, but he really didn't record a whole lot. But he primarily just sang songs and toured using the Great American Songbook. I couldn't find any proof of this, but my guess is if it cost $100 to see Frank Sr., maybe it cost $30 to see Frank Jr., So if you couldn't afford $100, you could afford $30. And I'm using relative numbers here, but you get what I'm saying. Okay. Frank Sinatra Sr. Now he's going to come to Las Vegas. I can't fly to Las Vegas, but Frank Sinatra Jr. is going to be playing in Waterloo, Iowa. And I can see that. Okay. That's where he got a lot of his popularity from, because he would tour everywhere. He was just a voracious worker. Was that a word? Did I mispronounce it? Oh, well, if I did, too bad. But starting in 1988, the old man, Frank Sinatra Sr., started having problems. He was getting older, okay? By that time, he was in his 70s, and most of his peers, many of his peers had died. The people he had counted on were dead and gone. And Sinatra always had his posse, and that posse was shrinking, and he didn't have a lot of people he could trust. So Senior went to Junior and said, hey, I need your help. I want you to start managing my career. I want you to act as my musical director and conductor of my orchestra. I want you to run the business. I want you to pick the songs. I want you to keep the band in play. And I'll just come out and sing the songs. After all that Senior did to Junior, Junior said yes. And again, as Senior outlived all of his conductors, all of his arrangers, and became frail himself, he needed help. And Junior knew the way Senior was. He said, look, I know the old man. If the old man can keep performing, he's going to keep living. The day he can't perform anymore is the day he just throws in the towel. So the longer he performs, the longer he'll live. He has more chance of success if I am the conductor of his orchestra, if I'm his musical director, if I'm his manager, his agent per se. If I run the show and just throw Dad out there, let him sing the song, say thank you and good night and leave, Dad can go on for a long, long time. And it worked. It worked very well. After Frank Sinatra Sr. died, Jr. resumed his career. He continued to be guests on shows like Howard Stern's Son of a Beach. He was on an episode of The Sopranos. He was on Family Guy. He did a lot of little stuff, goofy stuff, paycheck stuff, okay? And normally he just played Frank Sinatra Jr., all right? He was also on... He was offered the role of Vic Fontaine on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but he said, I don't want to play that. I want to play an alien. They said, we want you to play this. And so it didn't work out well. Okay. In 2006, and this is how I was introduced to Frank Sinatra Jr. In 2006, two things happened with Jr. First one was he developed prostate cancer and was undergoing treatment for that. Second one, he released an album called That Face. And it had a lot of different songs on it, most of which were from the Great American Songbook. One of them called Spice is one he actually wrote. And that album, That Face, made its rotation, made its rounds on that Frank Sinatra station. And it's really a very, very good album. That Face, I'm Afraid the Masquerade is Over, Spice, Cry Me a River, What a Difference a Day Makes, Softly as the Morning Sunrise. That's an Oscar and Hammerstein song. And there's a couple other ones that are on that album that are very, very good. And again, his vocal range is good. Sounds a whole lot like the old man. That was the last album that Frank Jr. made. He wasn't happy with it, mainly because he thought his voice sounded bad because he, again, was recovering from prostate cancer. And maybe he was such a perfectionist that he just never really liked the album. I liked it a lot. And I thought to myself, wow, all these years when you thought this guy was just a shill riding on his old man's coattails, that's not the case at all. If you ever get a chance, go to YouTube and look up That Face, Frank Sinatra Jr., and listen to a couple of songs on that album. It's really very, very good. Now, did it do much? No, because by 2006, quite frankly, nobody wanted to listen to somebody singing songs that people had sung for years and years and years. The classical ploy of, excuse me, singing from the Great American Songbook had run its course. Now, it's not to say that Frank Sinatra Jr. was not still in demand on live performances, because he was. People will still pay to see the man in concert, but people wouldn't pay to see an album because you've heard all that before, okay? He was married one time, wasn't married very long, about 2 years. Had one child with, who was his wife? Cynthia McMurray. But again, they were just married 2 years, had one kid. Rumor has it he had 3 other kids by other women, not married, but he never recognized them. Who knows if that's true or not. But a lot of people said, in fact, there was a guy named Richard Ginnell who was a music critic, and he had the perfect thing to say about Frank Sinatra Jr. And I'm going to go ahead and quote him. He said, Sinatra Jr. might have had an easier time establishing himself had he gone into real estate. But his show made me awfully glad that I decided music was his calling. There aren't too many singers around with Sinatra's depth of experience in big band music or his knowledge of the classic American songbook. There are even fewer with such feelings for the lyrics of a song and such a knack for investing a song with style and personality. And again, that album entitled That Face is a perfect example. Now, if you go to the iHeartRadio selection of the Frank Sinatra station, I'm quite sure there's any random day when I'm listening to it, there's probably not 1.3 people listening to this station at any one time. In fact, there may not be 1.3 million people who have ever listened to that station. Reason being is, who listens to Frank's? Who listens to music via their iPhone and a smart speaker? Okay, younger people primarily, and me, because my wife and kids showed me how, to be quite frank. But it's fine. Okay, who listens to music on the Frank Sinatra station? Not young people. Okay, sure, you can listen to it on your iPhone if you want to, but most people don't do that. Okay, but I do, and that's kind of where I've come from. That's kind of where I've gone to, I guess I should say. To me, listening to iHeartRadio on my smartphone, on my smart speaker, is just listening to the radio back in the old days. Because remember what I love to say, radio is not the appliance, but radio is the medium. It's audio. It's something that plays in the background while you do your stuff. I can run the wiring on a British car while I listen to music in the background, okay? It can be done via radio. And I'm so glad that I listened to the Frank Sinatra station and was introduced to the music of Frank Sinatra Jr. because he's gone now. He died in 2016. So he's been gone for, 9 years, died at age 72. They never really gave the cause. Actually, it was a heart attack, but who knows why. Apparently he had whooped the prostate cancer, but you never know if that put him into a weakened state or not. But either way, I was glad I was able to be introduced to that music. I was glad I was able to listen to that music because that's kind of a bygone era. Now, there's a handful of those guys around now. Michael Bublé sings that type of music. Harry Connick Jr. sings that type of music. But there's just not a whole lot of people who do sing that type of music. Mainly because there's not a ton of people who listen to that type of music anymore, okay? That's not a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's just a thing. The Frank Sinatra Jr. that you never knew. That's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's my email address, JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. Drop me a note. Drop me a message. I'd love to correspond with you on this and other topics. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.